Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to How Relationships Can Change Everything, the Social Ecology of Food Systems. My name is Susie Hoosier. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Outreach at Community Food Initiatives here in Athens, Ohio, and I will serve as the moderator for this session. Please note that this session is being recorded and transcribed. Before we get started, I want to make a couple of housekeeping notes. For this session, your camera and microphone have been turned off. The chat feature has been enabled, and you're welcome to send hellos, comments, and questions via the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll be able to ask your questions to the presenter as time permits. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lisa Trocchia. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Trocchia, who is a graduate of Ohio University with an interdisciplinary PhD in the social ecology of food. She designs courses and teaches in the online graduate program in sustainable food systems at Prescott College. A longtime resident and local food systems advocate and practitioner in Athens, she now spends most of the year living in a mountain village on the island of Crete. Lisa is a sensory ethnographer who photographs, researches, and writes about the performance of food, cultural foodways, and the modulation of effect embodied in food spaces. Dr. Trocchia is also active as a social systems network consultant, offering support in network design, facilitation, communication, and the development of structures that activate self-organizing, equity, and horizontal leadership. So, Dr. Trocchia, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to everything that you have to share.
Thank you so much, Susie. And thanks to everyone who joined, who is joining this session. I know the last one went right to the hour and it was awesome. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm actually down in Louisiana, where I'm visiting my son and daughter-in-law. It's Mardi Gras, and we're getting ready to see our new grandbaby for the first time, and I get the opportunity to be with you all, so it's a good day. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to sharing some of these thoughts with you. But in many ways, the supreme irony of the situation doesn't escape me. I'm going to be talking to you about the value and the potential of your relationships within the food systems work you're doing, and not being in the same space with you seems kind of awkward in that context. But, you know, these are the times we live in. These are the challenges we face now, how to cultivate and nurture relationships, how to keep them authentic and meaningful in new spaces and in new ways. So I'm hoping maybe we'll get a chance to discuss that a little bit following my presentation. So yeah, you can start with the next slide, if you don't mind, Susie. So yeah, I did think for quite a while about how to frame my remarks this afternoon, because I'm used to facilitating very highly interactive sessions. And I'll be honest with you, this is not going to be that. And the truth is, my remarks are only peripherally tied to the idea of strengthening community food systems. And that's because we're going wide angle today. For the most part, I think we get so hyper-focused on the work we're all doing that we don't often do that. So I hope you'll hang in there with me. I'm going to back us out to the 10,000-foot view, meaning we're going to be looking at some pretty broad concepts. And I definitely don't want things to get too theoretical, although there'll be a little bit of that. I just really think that this session builds very well on the types of relationships and partnerships that were highlighted in the presentation just before this. So you might think about this as just being kind of the how-to. Mostly, I just want to convey the big picture of how your work is making a difference, how making community food systems stronger through the relationships that you're cultivating when working on farm to institution initiatives is ultimately going to change the world. And I promise you, this is not hyperbole. I just hope you're a little intrigued by that. So let's get started. You can switch to the next slide. Yeah, actually, I think we went one. Maybe you should back up. I think maybe I didn't see where you were. Okay, yeah, it's kind of hard to see where I am. I guess I need a different view. Okay, I'm good now. So I want to talk to you about the ways we think about the concepts of change in the food system. And Frances Moore Lepay's first book, The Diet for a Small Planet, was published, I guess it's now maybe, over 50 years ago. Maybe some of you even saw Frankie when she spoke at Ohio University several years ago. I was fortunate enough to spend a good deal of time with her, and I know that she was profoundly moved by the number of old, yellowed, dog-eared copies of the book she was asked to sign while she was in Athens. But why I'm starting with this is that, sadly, so many of the issues brought forward decades ago in this book are still the case today. Eric Holt Jimenez, who was the former executive director of Food First, which for those of you who may not be familiar is a nonprofit that works to end injustices, the injustices that cause hunger. So he referenced this fact that, things haven't shifted very much in a keynote address that he presented at the Place-Based Food Systems Conference. And you can switch now to that third slide. Thank you. So here's what he said. He said, Frankie said two things in Diet for a Small Planet, which were absolutely revolutionary. The first was 1 in 7 people on this planet is going hungry. And yet we produce 1.5 times more than enough food for everybody. So clearly hunger is not the result of scarcity. Hunger must therefore be a result of people not being able to afford and access food. And the second thing that Frankie said was that we eat too high on the food chain and it's causing environmental problems. She was one of the first people to say this publicly and attract attention to this dietary shift. So in a way, I'm not going to say anything new because today we still have 1 person in 7 going hungry on this planet. And we still produce 1.5 times more than enough food for every man, woman, and child. We still eat too high on the food chain, and the way we produce food is causing massive environmental and social problems. So that's a pretty stark reality that he's painting there, 50 years, and on a global scale, not much has changed. The reason I'm giving you this context is so that we can establish first a framework for how we talk about making change. Eric has been very vocal about what he sees as the importance of how we describe our food systems work. And he argues that language matters, and I don't disagree. You can switch to the next slide, please. So he prefers not to say that our food system is broken. His assertion is it's acting exactly as the food system should be during late stage capitalism. In terms of our economic system, success looks like concentrating land and resources and power in the hands of fewer and fewer people, if not corporations, and offloading all of the social and environmental externalities onto the rest of society. He describes what exists as exploitative, as an extractive food system. So, he doesn't think we should be saying we want to fix the food system because that means you think it once worked well for everybody. Instead, he thinks we need to transform the current food system into something completely different. So I'm jumping out of the box here with a position that's arguably controversial, but where I do absolutely agree with Eric is that we must be concerned with transformative change when we do consider food systems work, and that's where you all come in. You are important change agents. And so what I'm hoping to do this afternoon is to share the broader vision of the work you were doing and the scope of the change you're helping to facilitate. And as I said earlier, I'm going to suggest that it is nothing short of the possibility to change the world. For sure, we're seeing change in the farm to institution sector because of the work you're doing. But what you're doing is actually feeding transformative change, the kind of change that shifts multiple systems. And the result is that it completely changes our social paradigm. Next slide, please. So I recently read a piece that I wanted to just share briefly. It was called The Relational Work of Systems Change by Catherine Milligan, Juanita Zerda, and John Canillo. And they started by writing, sometimes we lose sight of a simple truth about systems. They are made up of people. Despite all of the frameworks and tools at our disposal and all of the learning as a field of practice, purely technical, rational approaches to systems change will not make much of a dent in actually shifting power or altering our most deeply held beliefs. So that too is a pretty strong statement. But as a person who theorizes about the social ecology of food, I understand a truth in that statement. Relationships matter. Next slide, please. So I want to start talking more deeply about relationships now, and something I've already mentioned, the social ecology of food. But to do that, we have to make sure we're all sharing an understanding of what the food system actually represents. And I'm sure most of you have probably seen this graphic or one like it. And of course, we hear and refer to the term food systems constantly. But honestly, I find that many times the complexity of the food system isn't something that really is fully comprehended. And I think maybe because it's pretty darn overwhelming. But we'll just try to establish the basics here. So at this point, there are many sectors or elements that constitute the food system. People describe these variously, but for our purposes, let's just go with the graphics here. Each one of these nodes is a complete system in and of itself. There are very specific skills and a knowledge base, even a language required to negotiate each of these elements, what it takes to produce food, to aggregate and distribute food, to process it, to market and sell it, to prepare and consume it. And always there are these issues surrounding food waste. But the thing is, even as each of these is a complete functioning system, it's important to remember that not one of these can stand alone. There is a significant, probably impossible to fully comprehend, level of interconnection between these elements or subsystems, so that what happens in one necessarily impacts the others. Next slide, please. So when we understand the food system in this way, as comprised of smaller interconnected systems, what we are acknowledging really is the theory of complexity. And this is made even more apparent when we understand that the food system itself is subject to the influences of other external systems, such as political systems, academic systems, environmental systems, economic systems, and social or cultural systems. So, we're so long past the idea at this point of finding the solution that will change the food system. And hopefully, just looking at this image shows you why. There's no silver bullet. But that doesn't mean we cannot influence positive change, because we can. Next slide, please. Because of all this going on simultaneously, the food system is really best described as being a complex adaptive system. And as you can see in this graphic, which of course is an oversimplification, but nonetheless representative, there are many influences that contribute to change. So it really is impossible to do more than just guide the emergence of desirable outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But complex adaptive systems are nonlinear. And that is to say, there's really no such thing within these systems as cause and effect. That's kind of an old school thing we're really entrenched with, but there really is no cause and effect. There is no consistent direct relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable cause. So the takeaway here is that with so many variables, in terms of facilitating change, it's far more productive to invest in relationships and conditions and in guiding and nurturing those than trying to control outcomes. And I'll show you why and how. Next slide, please. The way change works in complex adaptive systems, which is how we now know everything works, from the cellular level to the universe, is that change is a process. It's not a predictable outcome. And it comes about from the type and quality of the relationships involved. Change in complex adaptive systems is self-organized, it's creative, and it's adaptive. That's something we're good at as human beings. So change emerges as a response to disruption. And did I say it's relationship-based? So yeah, much of my work as a food systems scholar has been exploring how we can understand change in this complexity worldview, meaning essentially the new ways we have of knowing that are being informed by things like quantum physics and chaos theory. So how to see change in a food systems context, which suggests how we can really best support what's our goals and aspirations for social change. Next slide, please. So because food is this powerful intersectional space in our lives, what I've seen is that when individuals become change agents in the food system, when the goals and the outcomes are values-based, meaning that they're motivated by interests in equality, in justice, in sovereignty, in sustainability and resilience, in the right of all people to have access to nutritious food. When your highest priorities are leveling the playing field and the care, health, and well-being of all sentient beings, then in the acts of doing this work, the relationships that are established are values-based. And I'm not all pie in the sky here. Making money can be values-based. When you're trying to create opportunities for small farmers to make a living while they're doing that in a regionally focused and regenerative way, when you're trying to make enough money to pay your workers a living wage and provide benefits, that's a values-based agenda. So the key is that these relationships are a product of self-organization. And by that, I mean all parties identify mutual benefits and intentionally nurture their relationships. And what emerges from self-organized actions happens in a very decentralized manner by adapting creatively to disruptive events. So self-organized relationships can happen. They create a diverse social ecosystem that puts everybody's relationship with food at the center. Food issues are the connector. So this is really the social ecology of food. It's diverse because it spans multiple sectors that ultimately help us redefine how we order our relationships to economic opportunity, for example, to the environment and to each other. So, this is really what's known as transformative change. Transformative change occurs when actions taken together work to shift multiple systems, not just the food system, but food systems' social relationships can be the driver because, quite simply, matters that relate to food relate to everything else. Next slide. So as you seek to make your relationships, your networks more diverse and inclusive, it's really going to be up to you to make the case to somebody whose primary work might be sort of outside the food system for why they will find value from interacting with food systems issues. So you're going to have to be prepared to answer questions like, why is making change in the transportation sector a food systems issue? Or how is changing the ways we think about economic opportunity a food systems concern? Or what is it about water, forests, air, and soil that connects them to the food system? It's cultivating relationships with folks outside what you may think of as farm to institution concerns that will ultimately bring the changes everyone seeks. And I know many of you know this, But I can't stress enough the importance of including those folks who may not see their immediate connection to what you're doing. They need to be part of the conversation. They need to know how the importance of farm to institution initiatives are to the work they're doing, the banking folks, the health sector, the healthcare sector, academia, city planners, economic development folks, local business leaders, folks who are concerned with tourism, environmental advocates, everybody. Next slide, please. So yeah, if we don't have everyone involved in the kinds of conversations that acknowledge the complexity involved in change across sectors, really the efforts that, just kind of amount to a Band-Aid over the hole in the dam. The only changes that will effectively move us beyond a temporary solution are those that work ultimately toward shifting systems. So it's the social ecology of food, which is this values-based social ecosystem working through a food systems lens that I believe can help guide the emergence of transformative change that can center equity, can help bring about more resilient economies, healthier people, vibrant communities, and establish regenerative natural environments. So if food systems relationships matters, how can you be more intentional about making them work toward the goals of your farm to institution initiatives and the goal of transformative social change? Next slide, please. Well, to some degree or another, you all do this naturally. It's called network weaving, and it's really a default human setting. Basically, we do care about helping others. If someone you know is interested in, like, I don't know, buying free-range eggs and you know a farmer who can supply them, you make that connection. You probably don't think much more about it. But when building a dense, diverse, and inclusive food systems ecosystem, you need to go a little bit further. And what I'm suggesting is that you really lean into this natural tendency and really up your network weaver game. Next slide, please. So as an intentional strategy, knowing that you need to find these ways to facilitate multi-sector conversations about change that are going to come from this food systems lens, you need to aspire to building bridges. So yeah, at this point, I'm talking about building networks. Networks are simply intentional relationships that, if facilitated well, have a structure that encourages self-organizing. And again, I mean, this decentralized activity where nobody is at the top directing all the activity. And that does take some facilitation. I think that was brought up in the last session. It takes time and facilitation, but it works. And you want to have structures that encourage horizontal leadership, which builds leadership skills. You want to also make sure there's opportunities for peer learning and sharing, and ways to support actions that people are taking, creative actions that are based on experimentation and adaptation. So building system shifting networks is really a completely whole different presentation, so I won't go too far there. But I just want to share with you some very easy ways to think about network weaving. And this technique is called closing triangles. So you can move on to the next slide. This is really simple stuff, but it's incredibly effective when it comes to helping guide the emergence of change. And you're probably doing a lot of this already. Clearly in the presentation before this, we all had some really great examples of how reaching out to others in a collaborative sense is making a massive difference. So the key here is just being intentional about it. Remember, because of how things work in complex systems, because of all of the variables, the best strategy is to just help guide the emergence of positive possibility. So you can see in this example, the local hospital administrator, and they're eager to maybe bring local food into the cafeteria and serve it to their patients, but they kind of need some solid evidence-based research to sell the idea. And faculty members in your region who might themselves be doing this kind of research or have eager graduate students interested in doing this kind of research, make that connection. Both connected parties are interested in the same thing. And because this act is connecting folks who might be considered outside the food system, you're connecting them with you and with each other. So you're also building these diverse cross-sector relationships that serve your interests. You're being a network weaver. You're supporting farm to institution initiatives, but you're also making these broader connections that work to shift more than one system. And this is going to change the work that everybody's doing. So, to do this, you have to make sure you know what's happening in your community. You have to make it your business. And it's more than knowing just the players. You have to know the issues, and you have to be thinking about how applying a food systems lens is going to benefit everyone. The other part of this is that when you believe in the power of people, the exciting part of closing these triangles is expecting creativity and innovation when these two parties do connect with each other. You might not be able to predict the outcome, but because you have been strategic about knowing your community and building these relationships, you really can feel reasonably confident that something positive is going to happen. Next slide, please. But yeah, closing triangles is a commitment. And this is what I meant earlier by saying that being a network weaver is upping the game from what most people think of when you say networking. And I know folks in the Athens, Ohio area get this and have been engaged with this for quite some time. But networking is really more about, it's more than just like shaking hands and trading business cards with a focus on who can help me get what I want or what my program wants. Network weaving is less self-centered. It's more globally focused. It's that bird's eye view we talked about at the beginning. When you back out to see that big picture and understand the complexity involved in change and the value in building a diverse food system, social ecosystem, weaving together relationships with that aspiration will get you what you want, but it's also at the same time transforming society. So just looking at this slide, you can see some of the levels of commitment when it comes to closing those triangles, and they're all good. Sometimes a mention is just as effective as investing a bunch of time in making sure folks are connected and feeling supported. You just don't know. That's complexity again. But you can see that beyond just mentioning to one person that they ought to connect with another person, you can insert yourself into the mix in varying degrees. You can do the email introduction thing where you address that to both people, and then they know you're kind of invested, that you're going to be part of that thread. So they'll kind of have that in the back of their mind in terms of at least their initial response. Or you can arrange to meet with both parties and then follow up with them, convene and facilitate, make sure you have given them support and resources to be successful. So anyway, yeah, the slide's been up a little minute, so you've probably had enough time to read through this. I'm sure you get the idea. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to wind up by recapping what I've discussed. The food system is complex and it's adaptive, and it's never too late to start investing in those relationships that support food systems change. It's important to remember that doing what you can in this moment to support the farmers and the food and beverage producers, the food retailers, the institutions, the restaurants in your region, it does create values-based value change and relationships. Next slide, please. So cultivating these authentic cross-sector relationships with the intent to develop this diverse social ecology, and then supporting and interconnecting these networks locally, bioregionally, nationally, globally. This is the thing that's going to bring about this transformative social change, this complete shift across all systems that's going to make the work we do last. It is in this way that values-based food systems relationships will create equity and justice, resilient economies, healthier people, and a regenerative natural environment. So the next slide, please. Thank you for listening. These are kind of complex topics. They really aren't if you sort of go slowly and stick with them. But, I'm not sure if there's going to be any questions on all of this or not. We are, as Susie mentioned, going to unmute folks, and hopefully you'll have your video too, so everybody can see everybody, although I'm not really sure about that part. But anyway, if you'd like to ask questions about the presentation, definitely we're here to do that. If there aren't any questions, that's okay too. And if not, I'd like to return to something I said in the beginning about the realities of trying to form meaningful relationships when there are still very real issues that come into play in terms of people being in proximity to each other at this point. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about any and all of that, about some of the challenges you've had as a result of this, as well as how you think maybe we can meet the challenges, maybe some best practices or ideas you'd be willing to share. So yeah, we can shift on to that section if you'd like. I don't know if there are any questions, Susie, or.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that inspiring material and conversation, Dr. Trocchia. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but we can give people a minute to think about things.
Yeah, sure. Or if you want to unmute people or give them that capacity, and I would really like to hear what the challenges have been for people in terms of trying to reach out to expand their relationships in the work that they're doing. When we're all having to be on, Teams or Zoom or something like that, and what maybe people think is working and what is it still remaining a challenge.
Nikki says that everyone now can unmute themselves, so feel free to chime in.
And put your video on. It's nice to see who's in the room.
Hi, Dr. Trocchia.
Hi.
This is Trisha Gill. I'm actually one of Dr. Trocchia's
hi, Trisha.
student. I don't really have a question, but I did want to encourage anyone who's on here. When I first started in the MSFS program, we learned about network weaving. That was a large part of the food systems course. And I felt really hesitant. I felt very hesitant to pick up the phone and bother people in the midst of their day. But the professor I had for that course just really encouraged me, because I had a dream of creating some initiatives for my community. And you guys, you pick up the phone and you call people and they are thrilled. They're thrilled to answer your questions. They're thrilled to connect you to more people. Now I'm the one calling people and saying, hey, you've got to meet this person. They can help you. I'm becoming a network weaver in my own community because I just reached out to people. I called random farmers and asked them to tell me about their business. I called an ag professor and asked him to tell me about their program and what his students were up to. And people, they really do actually want to help. So anyways, we're starting a school garden program at a new school, and we will be paying $0 for resources for the physical supplies because of all the connections that have been made over the past couple of months. So I just wanted to encourage people, because it's a kind of scary thing when you first hear about network weaving, and it's overwhelming, but it works.
Well, that's awesome, Trisha. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Like I totally am not going to be like bummed out if there aren't questions, because this is not the sort of thing that necessarily, your response is to ask questions. Lots of times you just have to let it sort of sink in and sort of see how you think about it. So it's fine. At the same time, I'm a Quaker, so, I'm comfortable with silence. We can wait and see if anything else emerges, whatever.
Hi, Dr. Trocchia. I wanted to follow up. You were talking about kind of the challenges of COVID, and
Yeah.
I know we are in a fairly rural area. And so, a lot of the networks I think we are used to using or people have accessed historically to connect to each other or make new connections have been harder to access in the last couple of years. And I'm just curious, your thoughts, or if you've seen people having some innovative strategies or ways to sort of keep those webs of connections expanding and growing. And I'm Mary Beth Sleem-Tanner. I work with community food initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Beth. That's a great question for a couple of reasons. One, especially in rural areas, it's easy enough for folks in urban areas, metropolitan areas, to just jump on Zoom or whatever, but our access to digital platforms can sometimes be challenging. And I'm also doing a project with folks up in Alaska at the moment, and we run into that, so it's great. If everybody can jump on Zoom, there's sort of ways to remain connected and to do innovative things. But, if your connection's not so good, or if it's just, the phone, then you're lacking that visual element. So it's a challenge for sure. So there's that. But I'm hearing that people are just picking up the phone and talking to each other. Sometimes doing creative things with like old-fashioned like food trees. I got food in my mind. Phone trees. It's just like, I don't think anything's emerging as being like super successful across the board, because I think it depends culturally on where you are and how people sort of deal with that kind of thing. I do know that I personally was part of a group that used to meet monthly and make food and eat together, right? And for the last 2 years, we've continued to meet, but virtually. So we just sort of share pictures of our food, and we still talk and have these conversations and whatnot. But so we've maintained that connection. It's been a little bit of a pivot, and certainly a little bit different in terms of what you get out of it, but it's still there and it's not dropping it, so there's that. But I don't know, have you or anybody else on the call, have you hit on anything that you felt has been particularly successful?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to hear other people's experiences. I think one of the we've lost some momentum on is, I think our connections within our existing networks have been able to stay strong, and people can still kind of connect to people directly. But just sometimes those more like serendipitous, like you just run into someone somewhere, or you're not in a community space and it's not someone. Like, I was appreciating your insight that the people who are already in our networks or like working in the systems that we already work in aren't the only people we need to connect to. So I think, ideas about how we keep widening those circles. I am curious if anyone's had some creative success in that. But thank you so much for addressing the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's challenging too, because folks are a little bit sort of tired of this platform too, frankly, and the limitations of it. So that's another challenge that people face. As I said, I'm doing some work in Alaska with folks, and the first round, we're doing some asset mapping workshops, and the first round was easy enough to kind of get the usual suspects to participate, but the communities there are recognizing that they're going to need to sort of reach out more personally, maybe make some phone calls, maybe start to put some things in the paper, or do some radio or television ads, or newspapers or whatever, in terms of education, to sort of point out why it is those people on the periphery, those people who aren't sort of the usual suspects, might want to be involved in an asset mapping project, So they're kind of phasing things, realizing that it is hard to reach those people who don't usually participate in the conversation, and it takes a little bit of effort. Well, maybe there's no more questions or thoughts, and that's fine.
We actually have a question over here.
Oh, yay.
Hi. So I'm kind of wondering, like, how can schools and institutions do better at engaging those folks that want to do more fulfilling work in the food system, like, but don't have institutional ties? I'm kind of talking about people that aren't going to college, that are going to work maybe and have like a negative stake in the food system by working at a fast food restaurant or something. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I would love to hear from everyone and ideas about that, because the last thing I purport to be is like the expert in the room. I think everybody has ways of knowing about things that are equally as valid. But I would say my first response is just that perhaps just facilitating an event, a conversation, and really intentionally inviting those people that you're talking to the event, and which is just sort of framed as a conversation, and beginning by trying to articulate some of the things you talked about, saying, we want to do this work and how important partnerships are, and this is the knowledge and information that we think that you might be able to bring to the table, and just sort of just being very intentional about creating this conversation, I think is the best way. I think, again, as was pointed out, those opportunities to engage with this sort of stuff spontaneously have been reduced a little bit. So hopefully we're moving past all of that. Oh, fingers crossed in the next few months. But until then, I think we have to be kind of intentional about just reaching out to folks and framing things in a way that will say that, we value what we think you can contribute to the things that we're interested in, and that, making people feel like they have a space where they can be heard and included, it always goes a long way. So.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I guess I should say also, I'm going to put this in the chat. So there is a great resource, networkweaver.com, which people might want to check out, which was started initially by Athens' own June Hawley, who has become the grand guru of all things network weaving. But that website has amazing resources for you that are free to download, that you might consider using depending on the situation that you're involved with, in terms of not only being able to articulate to others why they ought to be involved in projects that are really diverse, include diverse stakeholders, but also like how to convene and facilitate those kinds of meetings. So I would encourage everybody who's interested to have a look on that site as well.
We have about 5 more minutes, and people are unmuted, and you can turn on you have the ability to unmute yourself and turn on your video. So go ahead and chime in if you have any more questions for Dr. Trocchia.
So maybe you can put in the chat, like, how many people think they're doing a pretty good job of this already? I'm curious. Or do you think there's some room for improvement? I guess the takeaway from my perspective is just that we're going to make change no matter what we do. But if we become more intentional about trying to seek out and broaden and be more inclusive about the relationships we have, that the change that will happen from that transforms everything, right? I mean, we're working in such an amazing space. Food connects to everything. So it makes conversations happen a little easier that might be difficult dialogues otherwise. It gives us a foot in the door to really think about ways to change lots of different things. So when you have folks from multiple sectors involved in thinking through these issues, it will ultimately change what everybody's doing and, you know, make society a little bit of a different place.
And hopefully we can all network with each other and connect with each other following this summit, have a chance to connect with each other, follow up if we want to.
Yeah, that would be great. And that's really the value of these kinds of gatherings, is trying to capture all of that experience and know-how and ideas and creativity that exists with everybody who's attending these things. So I do hope that everybody will try to do that.
Tricia is asking if there will be an opt-in directory for attendees who wish to connect with others on these meetings. And I'm sorry, I don't have a definite answer on that. I know that that is something we did last year. Is there someone on the call who knows a definite answer to that? Nikki.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So the attendee list for each session will be downloaded and shared with the planning committee. To my knowledge, they were also going to be sending that out to everyone so that you could make those connections post-conference.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you so much. If there are no other questions for Dr. Trocchia, you can give a last call. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Trocchia, for offering your expertise and for this inspiring conversation. And thank you to everyone for attending. It's been really great to be in the sessions with everyone for the last 2 days, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I know in Athens it's sunny and about 60 degrees, so go and walk if you can.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.